Hello, I'm Ro. I'm the editor of Teaching My Cat to Read. Before the episode, I just wanted to say a few things. The holiday season's coming up, and if you're giving gifts this year, please consider books. Of course, we at Teaching My Cat to Read love books, but they're also great presents and they're so easy to wrap. And when you're looking for books, consider supporting your local independent bookstores, which are having a really tough time, particularly here in the UK as we go back into lockdown. I'd like to give a special shout out to friends of the pod, Colne Valley Books. They're a second-hand bookstore near Safeway that have a collection of fiction, non-fiction and antiquarian books. We'll have a link to their website in the description. Their physical location is currently closed, but they do virtual browsing. They also have a cat, he's called Thomas, and in an upcoming episode in the new year, you'll hear a special guest review from him. Okay, I'll let you get back to the pod.
Welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we are discussing everything about Artemis Fowl. So as a new reader to this book, do one of you guys who have read the book before want to give the terrible plot summary?
I mean, the best I could come up with is teenager tries to steal leprechaun gold, but the leprechauns have guns.
It's one criminal mastermind. How old could it be? Like 12? Okay, is 12 a teenager? He's like a preteen.
He's a tweenager. He's a tweenager. Let's use that horrible word for its intended purpose.
Yeah, so the overview of the book and then the series that it's the first book of is that fairies are real and they have sort of technologically consistent abilities but also magic. So they've got kind of high tech, but they also have magic. And Artemis Fowl, the junior, who is the youngest son of a crime family that has been around for centuries, has the bright idea to try and steal some of their gold, because obviously fairies have gold, right? And that's the setup. This tweenage evil genius getting up to hijinks with his big hench bodyguard that's sort of also his dad.
Yeah. Well, that's like very much Artemis's perspective, and one of the things I really liked about rereading it was realizing that, like from Artemis's perspective, and particularly from Butler's perspective, which is his bodyguard, it's very much a teenager can have little a crime as a treat. And from the fairy's perspective, it's like, this is it. This is the end of civilization as we know it. We're all going to die. And I had not really picked up on that contrast as a kid, and it was very, very funny this time around.
And again, this is another book that Lottie hasn't read. You spent too much time reading fantasy. But it's obviously a young adult fiction. It's aimed at 12-year-olds. Reading it as an adult, I'm thinking, who lets this 12-year-old child travel to go and commit crimes in other countries to then come back to commit more crime?
Well, that's part of it, is that he doesn't have parents. His parents
are like dead or crazy, so...
Oh yeah, but like, so if Butler's his guardian, this sort of, in a sort of a responsible adult perspective, you're just thinking...
but see, he pays Butler's wages.
That is true.
Technically, Butler works for him. Butler's not allowed to, although I think that's so much of the inherent comedy of it, is Butler, who is a very experienced, military-style professional, is like, 12-year-old, please explain to me why we didn't kill the witness to our crimes previously. And 12-year-old looks up from his, magazine on computers and is like, well, Butler, it's perfectly simple. A body is evidence. And Butler's like, yes, thank you, sir. And you're just like, what is this interaction? What is happening?
It's just inherently very funny. But part of it is, some of the serious stuff in this book is that his father is missing, presumed dead. His mother has had some kind of breakdown from the grief, and he is just left to his own devices. There's a bit where he's sort of saying, well, if things go back to normal, I'm going to have to go back to school. I'm going to have to be sneakier about my crimes. I'm not going to be able to brazenly wander around in all of the different places that he's been going to. He mentions having gone to Cairo, and he's not going to be able to openly be a 12-year-old criminal mastermind anymore.
I think it was quite... some of the scenes when he's with his mother, and it just shows you that childlike, the want to have the unrequited love of your parents, and them not giving it back to this child, and this child's having to recognize that he can't say, oh yes, my mum's going to pretend that I'm somebody else and I've just got to run along with it. And it was sort of like heartbreaking to see this kid who's just trying to make his life and his mum's life better through being an evil criminal mastermind,
which is all he knows, you know.
Which is
the only option that he has in his head. I think those are the moments where he most comes across like a child as well. Like the rest of the time, I was really struggling. I had to keep pulling my brain out of it and then go, no, that's a 12-year-old. You know how small 12-year-olds are. Like, and because I kept aging him up in my head. And I think the only moments where I really wasn't doing that were when he's interacting with his mother and like having feelings about it and then going, this is uncharacteristic and I don't know what it is. Anyway, back to crime. And you're like, that was an emotion, Artie. That was an emotion.
Listen, some 12-year-olds do crime to cope, okay? But it's a really interesting part of the writing that he is 12 years old and it does come through in some parts. And you do get this multifaceted character where he's pretty ruthless and the entire plan that he has revolves around kidnapping another sentient being for ransom money. And yet he is still very vulnerable in a lot of ways, particularly in the scenes with his mother.
And I feel like that was something that I really liked on a reread, actually, was you kind of got the feeling that the evil of him, the evil bit of the evil criminal mastermind, was just being a 12-year-old who doesn't really get consequences yet. You know, like, because there were so many moments where, like, you know, you could see, like, almost a person with empathy coming through that, like, from the way he's trying to present himself, like, just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, the fact that he specifically chooses a whaler to blow up to get the LEP's attention. And he's like, I hate whalers. There's less objectionable ways of getting, like, oil-based products. And you're like, why do you care? You've been telling us that nothing matters to you but money, and you're willing to, like, seriously harm other sapient life to, like, achieve your goals. You almost blew up a police officer, like, but whaling is objectionable. Like, it's really interesting how, like, his moral position is just not consistent and fully formed at all.
Yeah, it's like he's kind of trying to live up to this family ideal of running this criminal empire, and he must be a good criminal, committing these crimes and trying to get this gold back. And at the same time, like you say, he's a 12-year-old child with the naivety and the sort of empathy of a 12-year-old child and saying, no, I don't want to, you know, if I'm going to go and blow something up, it might as well be a whaling ship.
Yeah. I like that, he has moral instincts occasionally. Like, there's a bit where, so he's kidnapped a fairy because, spoiler alert, fairies do not have a crock of gold, per se. But the police force has a ransom fund for the officers that go into danger the most. So he has to capture a fairy police officer and, basically hold her hostage until the police force, the underground fairy police force, give him all their money. And he's got her in a cell, and he is lying to her about where he got all his information. So the first thing he does in the book is get hold of the fairy Bible, which has all their laws and, like, how all their magic works and all of this. And he doesn't tell her that. He says, actually, you've been here 3 days lying. I've had you on truth serum the whole time. The only reason I've been able to get away with any of this is because of you. And his, like, Holly just, like, completely loses it, and he's like, this is destroying her? Like, he's capable of recognizing, this is destroying her. Is it necessary? I mean, he still does it, so, you know, not morally excusable, but the instincts are there, which kind of lays the groundwork for the, like, later books in the series.
Where he's much more of a protagonist.
Yeah. Like, he's still problematic.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting, though, because I very much get the energy of he's playing with grown-up toys. He's putting on his dad's shoes, and he's very good at some of it. The logistics and the planning and the contingencies. What he's not good at is knowing how far he's willing to go. Yeah. Because he's still a child. He doesn't realise until it's too late that actually he's not comfortable with some of these things, or that he would have done it differently. And at the end, he and Butler agree, no more kidnapping fairies. They're people, actually, and we're not okay with that.
Yeah. That's another
Yeah.
thing that I quite like, is the tension between, like, Butler being very, like, okay with crime to a certain extent, but he has lines. He has honourable lines, and there are places in the book where Artemis either crosses them or almost crosses them. And Butler will bring that up, even if he doesn't necessarily feel able to go against Artemis. Like, he will say, I'm not happy with this. I'm not comfortable with this.
It's like Butler's trying to not become a father figure, but provide that sort of moral line to Artemis to say, look, we're all crossing a line here. And it's kind of, Butler is also indoctrinated in this as well. Having to go to the school to be basically told, oh yeah, you're going to be this kid's bodyguard for life.
Yeah.
And Artemis was his only friend. So from a moral standpoint, it's kind of weird. And sort of like you say, when Artemis is interrogating Holly, it's like the emotional manipulation of a 12-year-old child, thinking, where the hell has this kid learned it? Probably from the people he's around with.
Yes. So that was a conversation that I'd forgotten about. That so the fairy police get some psychologists in to try and, like, work out what the hell is going on in Artemis's brain. Sort of, I guess, the, like, American TV trope of criminal profilers, kind of.
That was the vibe that I got from it, definitely.
Yeah. But they can't agree on anything. But they have a conversation about how this is going to make their careers, and it totally ruins the sociologist idea that deprivation breeds antisocial behaviour. And they're like, this completely disproves that, right? Because he's never gone hungry in his life. But one of the others points out that, like, there are other things that you can lack, like, particularly as a child. And yeah, the very obvious things that Artemis lacks are parental figures who can actually respond to his needs.
And enforce consequences, because Butler can't.
People who give him boundaries, yeah.
Yeah. Talking about Holly.
Yes, because I love
Because
Holly.
A, what a babe.
Yeah.
And B, one of the things that struck me was, and I think a couple of you guys mentioned this as well, was when she's talking about how she can't mess up this. She's basically given the mission to go and solve the Artemis, and she's like, I can't mess it up because I am one of two women in this police force, and if I mess it up, that's negative for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's just, I was like, that is so true.
Well, in the book, she's not given the mission to go and investigate Artemis. She actually is. It's coincidence. Well, I say it's coincidence. She gets captured by him because she has not topped up her magic in years, and she needs to go and do it. And it's a failure on her part. It's a failing on her part that she hasn't done it in so long.
But...
And so it's, if she had done it earlier, she wouldn't be in this situation, which is also a factor in her feeling responsible for getting into, being the one to be kidnapped.
Although I do think that was some interesting interplay with her and Root. The fact that he asks her if she's running hot, which is what they call being, fully magically charged, I guess. And she lies because she says in her own sort of internal monologue, if he finds out that I'm not running hot, he will put me on traffic.
Demote her to traffic cop duty, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this kind of sense of, like, it's almost self-fulfilling prophecy, or, like, self-defeating, that, like, because she's the only one and she desperately wants to keep it because she actually likes her job and is very good at it, she ends up putting herself and everybody else in danger in order to maintain that position. Which, I mean, I think that's something that I think we can all maybe relate to, is the kind of saying you're okay with stuff when you're not because you have to in order to, like, maintain what meager level of respect you've currently garnered.
You can't say, I don't know.
It reminds me of people having to come into work sick because they can't afford to call out.
Yeah.
And, thereby being not forced, but heavily incentivized into making an unwise choice about their well-being.
Yeah.
Because the demands of their job are such that they can't afford to be seen as weak, or they, can't afford to take time off.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked that whole kind of interaction and that whole aspect of Holly's character. Because, well, when I first read it, I picked this up as, like, a 12-year-old or something, so Artemis's age. And that was not something that I think I'd ever really encountered in a book, was, like, an actual explicit discussion of sexism. And sexism in a profession and what that looked like. And I think it's It's interesting because I feel like Tumblr has sort of broken my brain a little bit in terms of like all that, you know, that like kind of, is it problematic for men to write women and all of this? And reading this, I was kind of going, there has never been a moment where I went, ew, you can tell a man wrote this. You know? And I had that with Sabriel as well. And like, I shouldn't be surprised, you know? But like, yeah, it was interesting. I was glad that it held up to that, you know? That I didn't reread it and go, ugh, that's not how it would go. It felt like, yeah, it was
authentic.
A complicated, nuanced situation in which Root, in many ways, has Holly's best interests at heart and does know that she's a good police officer, but at the same time is held back by his own sort of, the kind of protective prejudice, the kind of, I can't have the, like, squishy female die on my watch kind of thing, rather than, like, going with his instinct of, Holly is a good officer and I should treat her the same as everybody else.
It's like she's important because she's, in the book, she's the first.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's one character, so Root's friend, who's actually sort of trying to backstab him and gun for his position on the council.
Yeah.
Really just does not care if Holly gets killed. He considers that a completely fine consequence as long as it furthers his own political goals. And you have that kind of attitude, but then you also have Root's attitude, which is kind of to wrap her in bubble wrap and sort of treat her as if she should be under glass and fragile. So instead of treating her like a police officer, which is what she is, they very much single her out. She's either on a pedestal or she's under a microscope. Which is authentic, I think.
She has to be 10 times as good for Root in order to, like, maintain her position. But for Cudgeon, there's nothing she can do that would make her, like, a person that he has to care about.
Yeah. I did also, like, just a complete side note with the play on the word leprechaun. That made me so happy. Like, LEP Recon, leprechaun. I was just... Oh.
I love the line where it's like, technically she was also a leprechaun, but that was just a job.
Yeah.
And how it tied in with lore about, you know, fairies, is it wildings, like kidnapping like babies and swapping it out, and the whole lore behind fairies and, you know, leprechauns, and there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and then it's like, that's completely incorrect. It was quite nice to sort of read that in a completely different way. I really enjoyed that.
I did enjoy the actual, in this book, fairies' perspective on things that mud people think about them.
Mud people being the fairies' term for humans.
Yeah. And just like their general attitude to like almost the interaction that they have with the culture, because like Foley knows who Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty are. Why? Is there a black market in like mud people literature?
Well, Foley is a nerd. He wears a literal tinfoil hat because he thinks that mud people are able to spy on his thoughts. So he's sort of... He's the equivalent of the guy who lives in his parents' basement and is incredibly technologically skilled, but sort of fairly socially inept outside of that, and has special interests. And I think for Foley, the special interest might well be human culture. Yeah. Because he's afraid of it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
I did like when I can't remember which one it was, when he goes and flies about and it's like looking at the maps, like where is this on the map? And it's like, because they haven't been updated in 200 years, the map is completely incorrect.
The coastline has changed.
They've got lots more different things now. Which it gave me a good chuckle. But like again, I definitely enjoyed the writing style of this book.
Yeah,
it was simple, enjoyable, just along for the ride, and. It's, even though it is a young adult book, I think anyone can read it. You don't have to be whatever young adult is under the age of, I don't know, 25, 18, whatever it is.
Time isn't real. Age isn't real.
So it's complicated enough in terms of, like, who are you rooting for in this situation? Like, the characters are all, like, three-dimensional and interesting enough for, like, an adult audience. And, like, it's constructed very well. Like, it's a very good... plot. And I was thinking about what Lottie was saying about the lore, actually. Like, I liked that the magic system it's the magic system for somebody who's writing a heist movie, you know? It's somebody who wants there to be concrete rules that you then have to work within or around to make the plot work. There's no, like, extraneous magic vibes, blah, blah, blah. It is just, here are the rules. how do we get round them? How does that affect the plot? Like, it felt like a very, like, self-contained system.
One of the instances of that I really liked was, so part of the rule system for this magic system is that if a fairy enters a dwelling uninvited, they will lose their magic. Sort of implied to be permanently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's a problem for them when Artemis has Holly kidnapped in his house, because they can't just go in and get her. They have to be invited.
Yeah.
And obviously Artemis knows this and isn't going to do that and isn't going to give them an edge. But what they do instead is they find somebody who is a convicted criminal in their system, who's been, convicted for lots of petty thefts and whatnot, and he's a kleptomaniac, who has already lost his magic because he's been breaking and entering for donkey's years. And they press gang him into working for them because he's already lost his magic, so there's no penalty for him breaking and entering into Fowl Manor. And there is a really interesting conversation between him and the commander of the police, Commander Root, where Mulch Diggums, this character, is a dwarf, and dwarves in this universe are tunnelers, so they're trying to get him to tunnel under the mansion and enter from below. And he's basically calling Root out for asking him to do their dirty work when they also think that he's the scum of the earth for being a petty criminal.
Yeah.
Which I thought was also something that I don't think you see very often in young adult literature, was this dynamic...
Cops are not unequivocally good people just because they're cops.
I didn't feel gross reading it in 2020,
Yeah. You definitely, you see people cops doing things that are very, cop-like in terms of, thinking criminals aren't people, and just generally being very disdainful of people who don't understand their very serious work and blah. In their roles as cops, they're not hugely sympathetic, but it, also you do get the sense that, some of them are in it because they like violence, and some of them are in it because they're trying to help people. The book never expects you to just go, the LEP are the good guys, actually. Yeah. Which I really appreciated. Also, there's a moment where, Root refers to, some non-police fairies as civilians, and in my brain I'm just going, Mr. Vimes would go spare.
Vimes is my yardstick for a good cop.
Yeah. He's the only semi-decent one that exists, it's true.
I think the fact that Artemis himself is a criminal, the protagonist is, quote-unquote, if you're taken from a morally black and white point of view, is quote-unquote bad because he's doing crime. But then you have to go, well, why is he doing crime? Because he's trying to win the love and affection of his mother, and his dad's died. Yeah. And so you're thinking, okay, so why is he doing crime? And it just goes into this grey area of saying, well, look, and I think it's completely true to today. There are people who have committed crimes, petty crimes, that are product of circumstance, not product of they're inherently a bad person. Yeah.
I mean, as you were saying that, something occurred to me that this potentially, it's never said explicitly, but this reminds me a lot of that horrible trope you get where, the man of the house leaves, and before he does, he does the very serious, he kneels down, he puts his hands on the tiny child's shoulder and is like, you're the man of the house now. And that feels very much like what Artemis is trying to do, is that his role model for what the man of the house does is do ruthless crime to become rich, even though you're already very well off. But yeah, I like the fact that I feel like the book is very content to just let people be people and complicated. Okay, Artemis occasionally has good moral instincts, but he also...
doesn't listen to them.
He doesn't listen to them, yeah, exactly. And, the only occasions where we see him do things for other people is, it's to get his mum back. He trades half the gold for Holly to heal his mum. And, so they're all complicated and none of them are 100% right all the time. And I've said this before, I really like this in books, and it's something that I think I kind of forgot that I should be taking for granted in books. Because, again, Tumblr broke my brain, and now I'm like, nobody that I like is allowed to be problematic ever. And honestly, that's a very boring approach to have to literature, and it was not bringing me any joy at all. So I'm really enjoying, in this podcast, going through all of these things and going, oh, I actually quite like it when people are just presented as people in books, and they're complicated and they make bad decisions sometimes. And, we don't have to... I can enjoy this book without being like, Artemis is a good person and he's totally in the right. Or Holly is a good person and she's totally in the right. Or, I can just be like, here is a fun shenanigan that is happening that, involves, crime and also, like, discussions of human rights, I guess, or sapient rights, since...
But at the same time, the book never
humans.
beats you over the head with it. It doesn't ever feel like preachy about that.
Yeah.
It's just sort of built into the writing and the characterization.
Yeah. It's not talking down to kids. It's not like,
No.
here, I have a very simple moral message to impart to you. It's like, kids are smart, actually, and they can read this and make up their own minds about what's going on. But, like, the main thing is that, like, it's very compelling. And, like, what kid has not wanted to be, like, the horrible goose in Untitled Goose Game and just be like, do you know what, I'm going to cause problems on purpose. Like, that is literally what Artemis is doing. He's just like, I have no real adult supervision. I'm going to do crime. And to be honest, that is a very understandable impulse, and I support that. Not the kidnapping so much, but it's a completely, like, I think kids can really empathize with that, and I know I can as an adult, is just being like, nobody's watching me, maybe I'll just steal from people.
I think it's also just a nice thing, just coming back to the reading all these books as an adult with this podcast. Like, really recommend anyone listening, go and just, if you haven't read in ages, just go and pick up a book that is, you don't have to go and read classic literature. You don't have to go and read Dickens over and over and over again to feel like you're a well-read person. Go and read books that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And you will learn something from it, especially if there's a three-dimensional character, like in these books, where there's no, oh, this person's right and this person's wrong, and you should be like this person because they're always right. No, humans have fallacy. Humans are not completely perfect, and you've got to work out what is morally correct in moral ambiguity, and that's what makes everybody human.
Yeah.
And
So,
also
go down
the
and read a
experience
book.
of reading a book that has that as part of it doesn't have to be miserable. You don't have to read Game of Thrones. There are fun books that are enjoyable to read
That will,
that
like,
also
challenge
can
you
give
to
you
think
that.
about these things. Yeah.
I mean, I got through this book in an hour, and it was a great hour. It's fast to read,
My
but
God,
it
that
has
was quick.
so much in it. And that's a testament to the writing, because it manages to fit a lot of action and a lot of heart into quite a simple narrative.
Yeah. And, like, it manages to be very funny without being tonally inconsistent either. Like, I mean, Lottie's pointed out before that, like, it's surprisingly violent for a book for, like, 12-year-olds, right?
I've forgotten how violent it is.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
whole troll scene.
Yeah, well, they're, like, literally like, here's some viscera, have fun with that. And you're like, oh, boy.
Yeah, but you know what else? Young adult audiences eat that up. They love
Yeah,
that.
well, exactly. It's what's that Neil Gaiman quote about, it's not kids that think fairy stories are scary, it's their parents.
I was going to say exactly the same
Like,
thing.
it's never kids that are like, oh, no, don't read Coraline.
Children are feral, you know?
As an adult reading this, I think it does give myself a bit more further perspective. Like, you've got to let kids be kids, read books that you might think, oh, this is too violent for them. Well, they're not reading Game of Thrones. They're reading a young adult fiction book. They're reading an adult fiction book.
Yeah.
And if they are reading Game of Thrones, just give them Wizard of Earthsea instead. Do them a favour.
Or Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
My favourite.
But yeah, I mean, one of the thoughts that occurred to me, I was thinking about, like, just how the humour is, like, tonally consistent, and it's not something like the Hobbit movie adaptation, where, like, there's, like, this weird slapstick stuff that just does not fit with the epic tragedy going on in the rest of it.
It's very deadpan often. Like, early on in the book,
Yeah.
Holly is sent out to do recon on a troll that has gone rampant in the Italian countryside. And the troll later comes back in the mansion, which is the scene we were just talking about. But she then, goes rogue and actually tries to interfere with the troll because she knows it's going to kill people. She interprets a cry for help from a restaurant as an invitation, and therefore she can enter the premises. And she completely blows the cover of the premise being that humans still don't know about fairies, and everything they do is kind of to try and maintain the masquerade. And she is seen by everyone, and so is the troll. And it's just this dead silence. And she's just like, she's just like, scusamente tutti, and like takes a drink. And it's just really funny. It's just all of the people are too polite to ask, what the f***?
Yeah, they're just like, oh, it's nothing.
It's this very understated situational humour that works because it feels authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some of these things, there's one that I've quoted. My comment on this highlight is lol. That is all. That is what the comment is. And it's basically where Root's saying, oh, what is this? A circus? And then the other person goes, no, Julius, it's the end of the circus. And then he says, I see. And are these the clowns? And I'm just like, in real life, in a job, you probably would not say, that or be sassy. But it's the thing you always want to say if someone's inviting that kind of introduction. It's
very cathartic.
You always want to say, you want to be, you're just like, oh yeah, I love to be sassy and like put this person in their place, but you can't because it's in the workplace and you've got to be professional, or it's in school and you've got to be professionals.
Or you didn't think of the comeback until 2 hours later.
Yeah.
As is always the way. It's like 3 days later, damn, I've thought of the comeback. Like
the banter in these books is always just absolutely top class. Like,
it's one of the
there
things...
isn't a dud line in them, and I love that about it.
It's one of the things that makes Root likeable.
Yeah.
Is that he's sort of just very done a lot of the time, and that comes out in dry wit and insults.
Yeah.
And they're usually directed at someone that you are fine with it being directed at. He's never sort of... Whenever he's in that mood, you're on his side, which makes it even funnier to see him rip someone to shreds.
Yeah. I particularly enjoy his relationship with Foley, because they're both just so done and sarcastic and just completely have it out for each other, unless Cudgeon is there, at which point they're like, actually, fuck that guy.
Yeah, they just close ranks and determine to both annoy him as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favourite character dynamics ever.
Yeah.
So we both have dislike for each other, but we hate this guy more, so we're just going to get up on him.
Yeah.
Also, I kind of enjoyed it as kind of I'm thinking about this now just as somebody who works in tech and is surrounded by... not people like Root, none of them are as much fun, but just that kind of like people who at the core are men who at the core want to like are good people at the center, but like they're not great at not being sexist, not being homophobic, not being blah, but they mean well and they're trying, right? They're not that like I don't know. I don't even
you
know
can't
if
be
that's the right
properly
thing.
mad at them.
Like they'd spit on you if you were on fire. You know, they're not like completely irredeemable shitbags.
This
And
is the
then,
new
like,
standard that we are setting.
But like,
It's kinda like,
you see
Gold
him in
Star.
contrast to Cudgeon, right? Like the thing about Root is that like he's kind of unreconstructed in that he doesn't really understand like I don't know, gender studies hasn't made it to the lower elements. You know, he doesn't really understand why his approach to Holly is tokenism or why it's not necessarily helping her and what he could be doing to make that better. But at the same time, like, he supports her. He knows she's a good officer. He's trying his best under his limited understanding. And then you get Cudgeon, in contrast, who is like, actually, this woman is just a piece of meat who we don't have to care about. It's an acceptable loss to kill this police officer who is, you know, one of our best officers and, like, has just been through a horrible trauma. It's completely okay to just let her die with all the humans. And, like, I enjoyed that contrast of, like, it's a spectrum, you know? Like, Root is wrong about a lot of things, but he's also not an irredeemable scum of the earth. And there we have...
I think that's the thing, it's like, Root has this privilege, but although he gets the You Tried Gold Star sticker, and he's like, well, I'm not as bad as this guy, that doesn't make it excusable.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that he can't still improve. That doesn't mean say, well, okay, it's fine, I tried, I got one woman to do one thing, and she's there, therefore equality is everywhere.
Yeah. Sexism is over. Hooray.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like, you know, talking to someone who is, you know, I'm white, I have privilege, and you've got to go and address that privilege. You can't just turn away and say it's not my problem anymore. And I think, yeah, it is a scale, but that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, okay,
These
well,
things
just
don't
because
cancel
I'm not
each
as bad
other
as this
out.
person, it's not something, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
It is his problem. He can still be better.
I tell you what, I think the main difference is that people as thing, and like who in the cast thinks of other sapient life as things, and how consistently and to what level of consequence? Because like that is the root of all of Artemis's like actual moral problems with what he's doing. As Eli was saying, that's the conversation he and Butler have at the end. Is like they're too much like people. They're too much like real people, so we're not allowed to hurt them.
It's kind of he's seen Holly's, I say quote unquote human side, but because he's thinking, he's seeing their humanity. I mean, I don't know if that's the correct word.
I think they find it
Given
very
they're a
insulting,
fairy.
but I don't think we have a good, really real equivocent apart from personhood.
personhood. He sees that they are people.
that sort of level of empathy, saying, oh wait, this was an abstract concept before, now I've met one of them, and it's not like totally anything that I was expecting, because I had this preconceived notion of this thing, I'm privileged, this is what I think, I've read a book this one time, and then you've actually met a fairy, and actually they're nothing like this. They have feelings, they have emotions, they have wit, and
well, here's the thing, I think Artemis knew all of those things intellectually. He was like, yeah, they're people, they've got writing, so on. He wasn't prepared for what that meant. He wasn't prepared to then have to be able to empathize with them.
I think he's very divorced from his own feelings. Like we were talking about before with like the scenes with his mother where he's like, what is this weird lump I'm feeling in my throat? Maybe I'm getting ill. And it's like, no, Artemis, you're having an emotion. And I think that's very true of like his interactions with Holly as well, is that he prides himself on his brain. His brain is the most important thing to him. Being the cleverest is very important to him. And he like just does not connect with like his own emotions at all. He doesn't connect with other people's emotions all that much. He has them, but he's not really aware of or interested in them, right? And then when he's confronted with other people experiencing, strong emotions and negative ones that he has caused, he is shocked by the fact that he has feelings about it. It's like, intellectually he's operating on this like completely cold, rational level, but he's still a person who has feelings and experiences empathy. And I get the impression that he's quite caught off guard whenever that happens, and he doesn't really understand that that's good or that it's important or that it's something he should listen to. But he does learn. Like, I'd like the fact that at the end they're like, we wouldn't do this again. Like, it doesn't mitigate the fact that they've horribly traumatized Holly and almost like plunged the planet into interspecies war, but he is not irredeemable.
So he's sort of learnt that he can't just be... I think it kind of goes back to the fact that, he's had to effectively grow up by himself. He's not given this emotional support from his family. Butler's the only close thing he has to a dad who's, to a degree, yes, giving him boundaries, but not that emotional support, guiding him through this young child's wave of emotions.
Yeah.
Also, Butler is his employee. There is always that boundary, that barrier between them. And one thing to contrast is Butler is all that Artemis has socially, right?
Yeah.
Apart from his mother, who is a sort of an unknown quantity at best at the time this book starts. But Artemis is not all Butler has. He has his sister as well. Yeah. He has somebody else that he really genuinely cares for and is sort of obligated to because she's his little sister, but not in the same way that he is employed by Artemis. And so it's interesting to see there is one point at which Butler ditches Artemis to go and save Juliet, his sister.
Yeah.
And he says, look, I know he's my employer. I know I've got an obligation to him, but that's my little sister. I'm not letting her get hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I actually thought was really sad from the perspective of Artemis, because it's like he's got this one person and he's not even that person's most important person.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, really sort of, poignant and sad, because this poor kid is so isolated. No wonder he's so weird and doesn't really understand people and his own feelings. And it's something that we see throughout the later books, him developing and going through character growth.
Just like being around Holly, even in this book, is enough to make him reconsider things. It's very, it's very, we've talked about before the kind of the good place thing of we can't blame people for not improving when they don't have the support or the impetus or the role models to kind of, to make those calls. And I think Artemis is a very good example of that. And also it's a similar thing to something that people have said about Mad Max Fury Road, actually, is that like the kid that they steal from the warlord, the one that, that's not Max, he has a name, Nux? The one that's,
Nux.
Yeah. But like, it takes like 3 days of him hanging out with the wives to like completely get over the toxic masculinity culture that he's been brought up in, this really violent, horrible cult. 3 days with people who treat him like a person, and he's like, oh yes, people are people, and I'm going to be good for them, And I feel like that is very much the vibe I get from like, Artemis and Holly do not talk as friends, Artemis and Holly are completely on opposite sides of this the whole way through. They're antagonists, whatever. And still, the way that Holly behaves and the fact that she cures his mother and stands by that is enough to make him go, maybe I should reconsider my priorities,
Maybe people are good, actually.
Yeah. It's like he doesn't even really interact with her all that much. It doesn't take much for him to be going, oh, other people's personhood, actually. Which I think is really nice.
He's kind of got to give Holly the chance to prove herself. Like, he's kind of in his own head. And Holly being, like, the loving, caring person she is...
But also angry all the time, always, which I love.
Yeah, she's always angry, but she kind of goes, look, from a perspective, okay, what is the right thing to do? She's kind of going, hang on a minute, where is this child's parents? Hang on a minute, what the hell is going on here? And so she kind of, again, like on the flip side of it is, Artemis is learning, Holly's personhood, but she's also going, oh, this kid's a criminal, and then actually realising, hang on a minute, there is this grey area.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's just like the Good Place. You can't become an exceptionally good person if you're not given the tools to improve.
Yeah.
If you're stuck in this situation, which is not giving you the tools to improve, Artemis' situation being, he's effectively his sole friend / dad is also his employee, which is a weird power dynamic.
Yeah.
From a psychological perspective, he has no parents and a shitload of money. Like, it's going to mess him up. And so Holly's going, hang on a minute, is this kid actually a criminal? Like, why is he committing this crime? Because his reasons for it is, oh, well, fairies, leprechauns have gold, right? Like, that's the kid. That's a 12-year-old's reasoning of this entire situation. So it's quite nice to learn something from each other, but I think it's just reflective of you've got to give people if you're coming from this environment where you are sheltered or privileged, you've got to go and experience these other, I say cultures is probably the wrong word, but sort of these other experiences that allow you to broaden your mindset.
Also, like, just a tip for all of you listeners out there, we do not actually recommend that you do that by kidnapping people.
Please don't kidnap.
Yeah.
We don't condone kidnap.
Going back to the point where you said, like, oh, well, is he a criminal? Like, as the way that we define crime, absolutely he is a criminal. And what I take from that is to re-examine how we define crime, how we construct crime, and whether or not it is, fine to just completely tar people with a brush if they have broken a law. Because clearly, there's mitigated circumstances in Artemis's case. That's also true of lots and lots and lots and lots of crime.
Yeah. I mean, there's mitigated circumstances, but there's also consequences, and I like that the book doesn't make you pick.
Yes.
Like,
it
the
doesn't
book is
shy
like,
away from it.
These two things coexist and they do not cancel each other out. Like, I mean, you've all seen the Vincent van Gogh episode of Doctor Who, right? Like, I think the best line to come out of any Matt Smith Doctor Who ever was every life is a pile of good things and bad things, and the good things don't cancel out the bad things. But the bad things also don't lessen the good things or make them unimportant. And I think that applies as much to morality as it does to personal experience. Artemis having moral instincts and realizing that actually maybe he doesn't want to hurt people is progress, but that does not lessen the consequences. He very nearly started an interspecies war that could have destroyed an entire, civilization for money. And he was very aware that, that was the fairies literally say to him, you're going to kill us all. And he's like, I'm not really interested in us all. I'm only interested in me and my bank account. So yeah, I like that it doesn't make you pick. But one of the things that has been on my mind while we've been talking about this is there's a scene at the end of the second book where Holly and Artemis have been forced to work together for reasons. And we have more of that, Artemis learning to treat other people like people stuff.
Holly dragging him, kicking and screaming into being something of a good person.
Yeah, basically. And, there's a moment at the end where he basically saved her career by saving her trigger finger. That's the whole thing. And she throws a coin up in the air and she shoots it through the middle with her magical laser pistol and hands it to him and is like, look, I wouldn't have been able to do this without you. There's a spark of goodness in you. Maybe, nurture that a little bit? Maybe?
And the thing is, by this point, he does begrudgingly respect her quite a lot.
Yeah.
So he's sort of sitting there going, I don't know what to do with this. I'm having emotions again. I don't like it.
Yeah.
We're going to have to read book 2 later on in the podcast.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We should. There aren't any books after the third one.
Yeah, it's a real shame he stopped after 3.
They are just a trilogy.
I did hear someone tell me yesterday that actually, if you read to the end, which I think is maybe 7 books or 6 books, it does wrap itself up quite well.
Yeah, I've heard that, but...
Yeah.
you have to get through the whole time-traveling lemur thing first, and I hate that.
And the whole pretty dodgy treatment of OCD as well later on.
Yeah, like...
With the Atlantis complex, I think is the name of that book.
Yeah,
the next two books are very good.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, we were talking about them becoming friends and sort of, I guess... And we haven't really gone at the redemption arc thing, but I'm not a fan of that as a concept, but... It's one of the things that occurred to me while reading this was that if these books were published now, they would be cancelled so hecking fast.
Yeah.
That is like the main conclusion of all of the stuff that we've been talking about. It's just been running through my head this whole time. These books would get cancelled so fast.
When you say cancelled, you mean like now. Twitter cancelled rather than he would stop writing them, right?
Yeah.
Cancelled like Genghis Khan cancelled.
Yeah. I'm still not over that. Like, what?
Wait, what?
Just to date this episode really severely, yeah. Twitter's cancelled Genghis Khan because apparently it's problematic to be a Mongolian warlord.
Yeah.
This is the interesting times that we live in.
You heard it here first, kids.
Yeah.
2020 could not get more weird.
But yeah, the sort of the culture of moral absolutism that we have at the moment is, I mean, it's sort of awful for art and literature and things like that because that's one of the great powers of art and literature is to be able to explore things like morality and consequences and society and the way that we've constructed our ideas of morality. And if you just basically say you're not allowed to consume anything that is even slightly anything less than morally pure, you just wipe all of that straight out.
Like, Holly is a sympathetic character and also a cop, and we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Artemis is a rich person, but like he doesn't have any parents. I don't know. He's rich, so he can't have any problems.
There's no room left for nuance in modern sort of critical culture.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing that I like about this book is the nuance. It's not dumbed down for a kid audience at all. It's like, kids are smart, actually. They can cope with people being complicated.
Yep. And
also adults being useless. I think that is the thing that makes it a good book for kids, is a book that acknowledges that sometimes adults are shit. I think this is an important message for kids, and it's one that they understand implicitly and appreciate when other adults seem to get it.
You know, you have a 12-year-old going toe-to-toe with law enforcement, like magical law enforcement, and not losing, really.
Yeah.
He actually technically wins. And sort of the fairies also win because their goal is to not have an interspecies war, on their hands, which they also don't. The character who truly wins, though, is Mulch Diggums, that dwarf, who was busted out of jail to go and help with the cops trying to get Holly back from Artemis's mansion. Because what he does is he fakes his death and makes off with some of the gold from the ransom fund, and he's like away free. He is presumed dead, got loads of money, and can go anywhere in the world that he wants. And he turns up in one of the later books, like renting an apartment in LA with a supermodel on each arm, despite being, by all accounts, hideous to look at. And I'm so glad that the petty criminal got the happy ending in this book.
Yeah.
It just satisfies me narratively very much.
Yeah. And he's the one that has, like, by his own admittance, he's never done violent crime. But, like, he's being blackmailed into this situation by, like, basically with threats of being put in prison with people that will definitely kill him.
I mean, he is interrupted in being in a fight in his jail cell with people who are, they have essentially a gang feud between their two species, the goblins and the dwarves.
Yeah.
And he is about to be murdered when he is dragged out to be asked to do this job for the police service, for the police force, and their threat is, well, we'll put you right back in there if you don't. And it's one of the instances in this book where the police just aren't the good guys, or they're not unequivocally the good guys.
I mean, but it's I feel like it's something that, I mean, I've read about it before on Tumblr. I've been shitting on Tumblr this whole episode, but like, I do learn things sometimes. But people talking about like how even the assumption of guilt, like, makes people not be people in our eyes, that like our justice system has trained us to assume that people who've been to prison or people who are in prison or even people who are accused of crime are somehow less people than
like not being able to
else,
vote.
and therefore it's okay for the police to kind of invade their lives, even on a very like non-violent level. it's okay for people to infringe on their rights. It's okay for the police to go through your phone. It's okay for them to, and I liked the fact that Mulch Diggums as a character is very much standing, like, the point of him in the novel is to be like, actually, that's still a person, and you are doing shitty things to him in order to, like, make him comply with your agenda, and that's not okay. He literally says, I'm a person, you can't do this. Like, just because I'm a criminal doesn't mean you can't treat me with basic respect. And in some ways he's doing that to Needleroot, but in some ways it's very, very true. And I like that he's there to say that.
Yeah. And I like that he wins.
Yeah.
He goes from being the character with the worst outlook. At the beginning of the book, he's in jail, about to be murdered for, petty thefts, which, yes, he is doing petty thefts, but also his entire life is ruined because of it.
Yeah.
And then he goes to being just free as a bird with 12 ingots of pure gold.
It's what he deserves.
Yep.
Is he the least problematic person in this whole book?
I think he is, yeah.
He's not a cop. He doesn't hurt people, except for inadvertently farting Butler away from him.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. It's
the book is definitely worth reading
mechanic.
for just the dwarf mechanics alone.
Yeah.
It made me laugh so much. Just like how he can unhinge his jaw and then effectively fart soil.
Yeah.
He tunnels by eating and very quickly digesting and then ejecting soil, so that he just tunnels through the earth, leaving more soil behind him. Or compost, if you will. And it's very funny, and it comes in relevant to the plot, actually, in several situations.
Yeah.
I
love that it's like, it's bearable fart humour, I kind of worried going back to it, I'd be like, oh, this is cringe, actually. And I'm like, no, what? This is still hilarious.
This is actually quite funny, yeah.
Yeah.
On which note, guys, who would you want to fight?
Cudgeon.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, this is a really good book for this, because there are so many people who deserve a punch in the face. It's not like Austen, where there's like one cad that you should punch. It's like, most people in this book
you can make a case
fight.
for it. I tell you what, Holly does cold cock Artemis. And he's just like, it's this really funny moment where he just doesn't flinch, doesn't get out of the way, because Butler has always been there to stop that happening before, and he's not, and that's the point at which Butler has run away to go and find and protect his sister.
Yeah.
And Holly just punches him, and Artemis is like, that was a new experience.
This has never happened to me before.
Yeah. So Artemis does get punched.
It's not worth fighting Artemis. You can do like Holly and punch him once, but it stops being fun. like that's a child. And also Butler will kill you eventually.
Yeah, Cudgeon has it coming. I think that's a fairly uncontroversial one.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Root also, like, not to the same extent that Cudgeon does.
No.
But like, all the psychologists, I really strongly dislike the psychologists, and I would definitely fight them. Yes.
I would punch Foley, probably, once.
He is an obnoxious little shit, it's true.
But he sounds like he would be hilarious to work with.
Yes.
If I was any character in this book, I'd want to be someone who works with Foley.
Yeah. I like that he and Holly are bros, that makes me very happy. But, or like any of the sort of commando squad that are sent to get Holly back the first time.
Yeah.
Like any of them, just,
They could use a slap, yeah.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, Butler already did that, so maybe we shouldn't waste our
I love Butler
energy.
just like fight. The swagger that man has when he's taking out fairies who have absolutely no idea that he could even see them.
I love how many times, just in this book alone, Artemis is like, specifically Butler, I would like a show. Do not be like super understated about this. And Butler's like, this is very embarrassing. I hate it when people actually see me beat them up.
Yep.
I just like, there's a moment where like, he's got to cause a noisy distraction on the dock so Artemis can rig the whaler to explode. And he's like proper like screaming like a banshee, I think is one of the descriptions. And like, he like dispatches one of these guys with a spinning kick. And he's like, this is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me. I'm so ashamed of myself.
Yeah.
And then Artemis has the gall. Artemis has the gall to tease him for it afterwards. He's like, a spinning roundhouse kick, Butler. Your sensei would be spinning in his grave. And Butler's like, you told me to do that. Like, what did you want?
Like, why did you have to see that?
I'm just following the 12-year-old's instructions. And I'm just going to say, on which notes, we probably should wrap up soon. What do we think the cat would give this book as a rating? I think quite high.
I think quite high.
There's so much crime. Also, Artemis is definitely a cat person, right?
Mm-hmm. I think there would be tension because Butler is a dog person for sure. Butler is a big dog person.
But on the other hand, he has had to deal with Artemis forever, so I feel like he's the kind of dog person that does not get scratched by cats.
Yes, because he's just uninterested in them. He just doesn't. He respects their boundaries. He's just not interested in them.
Yeah.
I think the cat would love this book. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of being sneaky. Foley is very sassy, which I think also the cat would appreciate, and being full of personality as she is. I would go for maybe even a 9.5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like we're saving the 10 rating for a book that is all about crime but also features cats.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I also feel like seeing as we are teaching her to read a young adult novel is probably a bit more accessible as well, and that probably raises the rating.
That's a very good point. We have not been going easy on her in terms of
No, just wait, we'll do War and Peace sometime.
I was going to suggest Les Miserables.
We won't.
Which has an entire chapter about sewers.
Oh dear. Maybe we should keep an eye out for books about cats and crime, specifically so we can find one to give the treasured 10 out of 10 rating. I will say a 9.5 out of 10 for this book.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I was going to say, if any of our listeners know a book which have a plot which includes crime and cats, please send us an email. We'd love to read it.
Yeah. Help us in our quest to get the perfect 10 out of 10 Gothmog rating.
Send us recommendations. We love a good recommendation.
Yeah, maybe this podcast, once Gothmog has learned to read, will turn into the quest to find a book that would be perfect for her.
It will morph into that. But yeah, I think we probably should wrap up soon.
I was going to say, speaking of recommendations, what have you guys been reading recently?
Still Wheel of Time.
I bought a book called End Times, which is about all the various ways that human civilization might end. I've read the first couple of chapters which covered asteroids and supervolcanoes, and it's terrifying. I'm now far more anxious about these things than I ever have been before. Haven't got to the chapter on climate change yet, which is sort of why I bought it, but I'm sure it'll be depressing when I do. But it's actually quite cathartic and nice to read a book by a journalist who has covered climate change. He's covered a lot of geopolitical stuff over the last 20 years, and he's just had a son at the time of writing this book and sort of become a lot more anxious about the future of humanity because he's sort of thinking about it in terms of, this is the world my son is going to grow up in. So it's nice to see some of my own fears and thought processes echoed in a book by a real adult with life experience who actually can be expected to know about these things. It's quite validating.
I mean, side note, we are real adults with life experience.
Don't say that.
I imagine it's quite nice as well to have it be kind of, here are some factual limits on the level of catastrophe. Like, even if it is awful, it's nice to know to a degree. Like, it's nice to have a framework of exactly how awful is this going to be. Because I think when your anxiety is very formless about these things, it's almost worse. Because there's nothing worse than your brain just being like, I know something is going to go horribly wrong, and I can't tell you specifically what it is. So it's just worse that way. The anxiety is always huger when it's unformed.
Yeah. Knowledge is power, and the power might be to tell my anxious brain to shut up.
So I apologise for saying huger. I just heard that in my brain, and I was like, words. Why? I have multiple degrees in languages.
Hey, just make up a new word
and
for English language.
That's my contribution to this podcast is huger.
How about you, Lottie? Have you been reading anything interesting?
Yeah, I'm still on my Wheel of Time reread. I'm in the bit which is known as quote unquote the slog, which I feel is a bit of a not nice term for it. It's basically there are like three books where the author is doing a heck of a lot of world building to build up to the final 3 books of the 14-book series, where the pace picks up again. But Robert Jordan is known for having absolute detailed writing, and so you've just got 20 pages of him describing a throne room or the clothes, and you're just like, please.
Is this the modern equivalent of the many chapters about sewers from Les Mis?
I mean, I think it might be, but I think also when books were released, they were released 2 to 3 year intervals. So you've been waiting for this book for 2 to 3 years, and it's just another description. So I remember when I was reading them, it didn't feel as much of a slog, but one of the characters does get slightly angsty, and it's slightly annoying. And I just, one of my things that we'll put, again, when we have I say roundtable discussion, a show and tell of your favourite book series, for me is Wheel of Time, is there are so many main characters in this book, and they're very 3D, so you can hate one or love another. And reading it growing up, like at 13, I loved the princess. She was really cool. And then at 27, I'm like, why are all these children leaving this village? No, they are children. They should go home and go and farm sheep. Like, all this.
This is a theme for this podcast, isn't it? Is coming back to things you enjoyed as a kid and going, where are the sensible adults? Where is the health and safety? Where's social services?
Who's making sure you're eating your vitamins? You're going to get scurvy.
There is literally like one 22-year-old who runs around basically being the healer, being like, what are you doing? Here's some herbs, eat this herb, eat this herb, eat this herb. And I love her. And she's my absolute fave. The knave all the way till I die. Anyway, I'm going to stop on my little Wheel of Time rant because I love it so much.
We're going to have to read some of it. I think this is the only solution for this. We gave you a whole episode to vent your Wheel of Time feelings.
And we'll just be the peanut gallery and provide commentary.
Yeah, if any of our listeners also love Wheel of Time, please message us. I feel like there's like so few of us in the world. It feels like I know they exist in the atmosphere. But yeah, I guess we should probably wrap up.
Yeah.
So next time we're going to be chatting about Persuasion. Jane Austen, am I correct in that,
yep,
guys?
Second Austen of the podcast.
I made that up in my head. Yeah, it is Jane Austen. So yeah, Persuasion next time. So thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe, review, add us on Twitter, we're on Instagram, our website, teachingmycattoread.wordpress.com. That has all the links for all of our socials. And if you want to go listen to any of our previous episodes, I think they're all going to go up on YouTube at some point. Say hello, send us a message, recommend us some books with cats and crime. That'd be great. So big virtual hugs, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.